Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is David Novak. Yesterday I did a video which was something of a show and tell. I pulled out from their places on the shelves every book that I own relating to slavery and just showed them, talked a little bit about them minimally, whether I had read them or not. I was first led into slavery as a subject for inquiry by the works of the ancient historian M.I. Finley. And it occurred to me, and I've threatened this at times on my channel, that I should just do a show and tell video of all of my Finley and Finley adjacent texts or books. And so I've pulled them all down from the shelf. Some booktubers do essentials videos where they talk about all the books that they have which are essential to them. Sometimes these books will occupy a special place on their shelves. I don't have essential books per se, but Finley and Finley adjacent books have always occupied prime space on my shelves. So they're always right where they're clearly visible and where they can be gotten to immediately, except for a few sort of really tenuous connections. So I have them all piled here, and I will talk a little bit about them. Now, I'll start with this big one, get it out of the way, the Atlas of Classical Archaeology, Finley. I've never looked at this one really. I mean, I've glanced through it. It almost is like an encyclopedia of the different sites. It's the kind of thing, if I were interested in this, I think I would want something more current than this. But his writing is impeccable, of course, so I would of course look at this and read it if I were that interested in the subject. Now, Finley was of interest to me largely because he taught about history, how we understand, how we know what we know. And so my focus has never been so much on ancient Greece per se, but because that was his concentration, I took an interest in Greece and then in Rome. But my original motivation for reading him, and that book will come up, was just merely to understand history at all. And he is a good place to go for that. So I'll start with his books and then get to the adjacent, as I call them. This is Early Greece. You know, I just realized this is from a series, and it is edited by Finley. So, and I have other books in that series. They will come up later. So, as far as Bronze Age, subsequent to this, and actually more recently, I read Robert Drew's on the Greek Bronze Age and liked it. But this was a starting place. And well, let me just read you some of this. In the study of man's early history, what is observed most clearly and readily is his technological progress. That is why it has been a long-standing convention to divide early history into broad periods according to the hard materials from which cutting tools and weapons were fashioned: stone, copper, bronze, iron, in that order. Then, as knowledge of the past increased, the long periods were subdivided in different ways. When it was noticed, for example, that in due course the technique of giving a sharp edge to flint and other stones normally changed from flaking to grinding, the Stone Age was divided into Old Paleolithic and New Neolithic. Soon it became necessary to speak of Lower, Middle, and Upper, or Advanced Paleolithic, of an in-between Mesolithic period of early and late bronze, and so on. and also to separate each age according to region or civilization. A shorthand was thus created, and its use persists despite a growing awareness of its inadequacy and even of its tendency to mislead. So that's the kind of crisp explanation you get from Finley about everything. And so for a novice who knew nothing, had studied none of this, this is really a great place, and it was for me to start. So, onward. This is a series of lectures. I think it was 3 lectures, and then there's 2 essays that were added later, something like that. A very nice book. I've read it a couple of times, talking about well, just what it says, and the modern idea that the population of a country should be ignorant of what's going on and should go into elections being ignorant of the issues and what's at stake. He did not believe that, and of course, the ancient Greeks would not have thought that ignorant people voting was a good idea. The ancient Greeks, this is just an overview of the Greeks, focusing on his preferred period, the classical period. So for the Bronze Age, you'd be best going to that other book. And then if you want anything after classical Greece, well, he just gives it as sort of like almost like a little postscript. And so for a long time, my knowledge was very ignorant of the whole, I don't know what you call it, the Greek diaspora, the whole spread of Greek influence. And it's only been relatively recently that I've gathered some of that information, probably dating to when I read The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire just a couple of years ago. But he had his focus, and this was one of the first books that I can recall where the illustrations, I think in the other book that I have, they are on separate plates. Here they're just printed on the page. Actually were meaningfully tied in to the narrative. And he talks about different subjects: visual arts, sculpture, painting, comedy, tragedy, that sort of thing. So a very good introduction, but it's not a complete one. The world of Odysseus is the one that put him on the map. Here's one with an introduction by Bernard Knox. I can't speak highly enough of this. I believe for a lot of these books, there are more recent editions out with new introductions talking about how the books have borne the test of time. And I would like to have those, but whenever I've seen them, they've been too costly. And of course, it's really not that necessary for me to have any of those or to know any of that. So, as I say, keep in mind, unlike with most things, the books actually by Finley, for the most part, I have read them. So this is a marvelous collection of essays. I frequently mention the closing one, The Heritage of Isocrates, but they are just all really wonderful. He talks about the use of generalizations in history, the ancestral constitution. It's a really marvelous book for getting your sea legs about history. Now this, I showed in yesterday's video because there are 3 sections here. The middle one deals with slavery, and some of the essays are really marvelous for coming to grips with the terminology of slavery. And this was a collection that Brent D. Shaw and Richard Saller put together, and he did not interfere. They asked for his permission or whatever, and he said, just do whatever you want. And I respect him for that. I am sorry that in the years since his death, no more of this sort of compilation have come about. His papers are scattered in different publications. I don't know that anybody has collated them. He has had no biography written about him. I would like to see a biography. I would like to see complete letters and papers, that sort of thing. Library of America has a 2-volume set of Edmund Wilson? Why not Moses Finley? I think probably Finley is more important than Wilson, but I like Wilson as well. So ancient slavery and modern ideology. I showed this one yesterday. It's really essential for partaking of the study of slavery in the ancient world, but probably good for elsewhere also. And this is politics in the ancient world, and it may well be my least favorite of the ones that I've read. I've read it a couple of times, and he really broadly treats of Greece and Rome almost as though they were the same. And I don't know, it just never really gelled with me. But anything he says, though, is worth paying attention to. Now, here's the book that brought me into the study of history, Ancient History, Evidence and Models. You can't see that. In the original paperback that I had, Evidence and Models was bigger. So it's divided into several sections. It's a very short book, I think just a little more than 100 pages. So number 1, Progress in Historiography. 2, The Ancient Historian and His Sources. 3, Documents. 4, How It Really Was. 5, War and Empire. And 6, Max Weber and the Greek City-State. So all good stuff. You will not think the same of historians when they say that they want their history to tell or report how it really was. Another little collection of essays, aspects of antiquity. It's a short paperback and a very light book. The Silent Women of Rome is in here. There's a Plato and Practical Politics, talking about Plato's philosophy in practice. The Etruscans and Early Rome, which starts talking about D.H. Lawrence. A really nice piece about Diogenes. It's just a wonderful essay. What kind of a man was Diogenes? He wore a barrel for a cloak and wandered about with a lantern in broad daylight, looking for a good man. They called his prose lucid, and it is. Thucydides, the moralist, Christian beginnings, the Silent Women of Rome, who was this one? The Aulus Caprilius Timotheus, who was, I believe, a former slave and then became a slave trader. Just windows into antiquity. So they're, as I say, they're all pretty light reading. The other book, The Use and Abuse of History, is a little bit heavier. Now, this is one that I've never read. It's part of a 3-volume set, and I only in the last year acquired the other 2 volumes, which are not by Finley. They are by something Mac Smith, I think, Dennis Mac Smith. And I've attempted this one and got nowhere with it. And I think, again, having had Gibbon, I am probably more adequately prepared for this, understanding more now about the role of Sicily in the Mediterranean, which when I first attempted this, I was at sea, so to speak. So it is a hope of mine to read the 3-volume set one of these days. I should have pulled those, but I will leave that for another time. The Ancient Economy, a book which is still talked about. It's a really good argument saying that a lot of the terminology that we use today did not apply to the ancient world. So we talk of markets and stuff like that, but it's divided into good different chapters. Let's see. I'm not finding the table of contents, darn it. Well, the ancients and their economy, orders and status, masters and slaves, landlords and peasants, town and country, the state and the economy, and then, of course, future thoughts. You have to get an edition with the future thoughts. Without it, it looks pretty much the same as this. But I think there's possibly even an expanded edition since that one. Now, yeah, this is by Finley, and I don't think I've read this, or I've read it, and I think I did actually read this, yeah. For some reason it says Greek history, and you will see it listed as that, but it's actually titled Land and Credit in Ancient Athens. It may well have been his dissertation, or something early, because I have another one also, I think. Oh no, that's something he edited, yeah. So this, I think, was his dissertation. It says advisory editor. So I've read this one, but not gotten much out of it. Now there's studies in Roman property, which I kind of group with that, and I think it's just a collection edited by him. I'm not really sure about this. It's for sure something I have not read. Yeah. Let's see. It's got Peter Garnsey, who you will see. It's got a piece by Finley, Private Farm Tenancy in Italy Before Diocletian, which I have not read. So I've never really looked at it, but it's kind of like this typescript, sort of. I have his book on the Olympic Games, which he wrote with H.W. Pleckett, I guess. I haven't read this, but I'm hoping to read it this year, this summer, for a booktube event, sports summer, or the summer of sports, I think it's called. So I'm hoping to get there. And then once I was in my local half-priced books and just happened to see a folio edition of The World of Odysseus. And I bet it has the Bernard Knox introduction as well. It's a lovely, oh no, it's got an introduction by Simon Hornblower. So I don't know who that is. I'm sure I've read the introduction just to get some more information, but I don't remember it. Now we'll get into some paperbacks. Oh, I did those paperbacks. So now we're getting into, pardon me for being confused. I have all these things piled up. Now we're getting into Finley adjacent. And I mentioned that one series that he edited. So there's something by Claude Moses, The Ancient World at Work. I believe I read this and don't remember much. Not all of these books are equal. And they are not, the writing is not equal, is what I'm trying to say. The Greek Tragic Theater by H.C. Baldry, and I think I may have read this, but I can't remember for sure. If it's certainly something that I should review. Now, interesting. I didn't realize the Comic Theater of Greece and Rome by F.H. Sandbach, and I know I have read that. And interestingly, though, I don't think I read that because he later went and revised the book, and so I read it in its revised edition, not in the original one. I probably should have just left well enough alone and read the original one, but so. Early Greek Science, Thales to Aristotle by G.E.R. Lloyd, and then Greek Science after Aristotle. And I've read both of these a couple of times. G.E.R. Lloyd is a very good author, I think. And he did the Penguin Hippocratic writings. And it's just a real good introduction to science as developed by the Greeks. His name will pop up again shortly. The Romans and Their Gods, R.M. Ogilvy, and I think I've read this or attempted this one, but again, I can't really remember too much about it. Oh, and interesting. Somehow I have two different ones here. I didn't even realize that. I assume it's the same book. I've not compared them. Social Conflicts in the Roman Republic. I know I've read that one, deriving little lasting knowledge from it. And of course, I read Augustus by A.H.M. Jones, and I've read other treatments of Augustus, which I prefer to this. I think it was a fine introduction, but it's the kind of thing you probably want to go with more recent again. And this one is Moral Values and Political Behavior in Ancient Greece. You know, in the old days, even finding out what other books existed in this series edited by Moses Finley was not so easy. And then coming across them, well, with the advent of used book selling online, I managed to pick up more, but it was tough. So I don't think I've looked at this one. Problems and Methods, Adkins writes, this book will discuss moral values and political behavior in the period between Homer and the end of the 5th century. Its scope requires some explanation. In the context of ancient Greece, politics may well suggest a discussion of the 5th and 4th centuries rather than a treatment which, however briefly, includes the Homeric poems and omits the 4th century altogether. So it sounds pretty clear to me. A.W.H. Adkins. And then this Nero by Warmington. I believe he also wrote a book about Carthage that was in a Pelican edition. I've read this one and liked it, but I've read a number of books about Nero as well, and so I no longer remember who wrote what. And yesterday I showed the book by Yvonne Garland about slavery. He had a book in this series, and somehow I've never read this one as yet. So it's something I hope to get to. And I don't know why I have this here, Engineering in the Ancient World. I think that I believe possibly it once had its life as part of that series as well, but I'm just not sure. This is published by University of California Press, but it looks as though it would fit in very well, and it looks very good. Now, getting into more things edited. The Legacy of Greece, a New Appraisal. There was an old book titled The Legacy of Greece, just talking about what you would expect from the title, and Finley was approached to do an updated version. And I read all of this and just did not enjoy it. It did not care for anything that I read in it very much. Possibly in the future I would feel differently. And then here is his edition of Josephus. So it's selections. So the Jewish War, I don't know that the Jewish War is rendered complete in this book, but there are selections from other things. I do hope to get here one of these days, because I do hope to tackle all of the ancient historians. I'm just not there yet. Okay, now here is the Greek historians, which give you selections of, I think basically the first four. Yeah, that's it. You can see who they are. And I've never read this. It is a book that I picked up somewhere at a used bookstore, and it had a bad smell to it. The smell seems to have dissipated, but I always kept it apart from my other books and just never really looked at it. And for some reason, I have a clipping in here. So, and when it comes to historians, of course, this is the Rex Warner translation of Thucydides, and Moses Finley introduced it and provided notes for it. Of course, he loved Thucydides. Now, I should show you this. I've related the anecdote about how when I was a boy, our neighbors had a garage sale of some sort, and there were a couple of books left over that they couldn't sell. And then the neighborhood kids said, "Why don't you want any of these?" And I took two. One of them was The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky. I don't have that edition anymore, but I have read it. This was the other book that I picked up, and it was Thucydides, The Peloponnesian War, and I've read parts of it, the Crawley translation, I believe. And you'll note that let's see, oh, you don't see it here. Oh yeah, you do. The introduction is by John Finley, and I for a long time I wondered, what is the relation? I mean, I had no biographical information about Finley or anything. Finley comes up in my big poem, The Requiem, and I made mention of his exile. But at that time, I had no idea what his exile was. I didn't know anything about what had transpired in his personal or professional life. So, well, since I have brought that up, let me show you then a couple of books. We're getting kind of out of sequence here, I suppose, but Classical Antiquity and the Politics of America. And it's been a long time since I've looked at this, but I think, edited by Michael Meckler, and there must be mention of Finley in here. Oh yeah, The World of Moses Finley, the year 1939, in M.I. Finley's development as a historian, Daniel P. Tompkins. And these other books, I might have that also in a different book. Daniel P. Tompkins, I think he may not be alive now, but he seemed to have been a Finley scholar. And if anybody had the materials for a Finley biography, it would be or would have been him. I really don't know anymore. It's been a while since I've looked at this, although just earlier this year I did read, I think it was this one, Moses Finley and Politics. And this is the kind of book, it's real short, and you have to spend like $100 for it. And I did, just because I need to have everything I can about Moses Finley. So let's see. Yeah, Moses Finley and the American Scenes, the Political Formation of Moses Finley by Daniel P. Tompkins, and essays by other notable historians. And that was followed up by another book about Finley, and I had intended to follow up the rereading of that one with a rereading of this one, and I just haven't gotten there. What an awful cover. But this has a nice piece by Mary Beard in it. And there's The Making of Moses Finley by Daniel Tompkins. Finley and the University of Cambridge by Geoffrey Lloyd. That's the G.E.R. Lloyd that I mentioned. And Finley's Journalism by Mary Beard. Another by Paul Cartledge. So, and another something by Peter Garnsey, which talks about Finley and Momigliano, who was very important to Finley, an important friend. And then this book talks about the case of Moses Finley. And I read it so long ago. Back in the day when I was trying to find out about Moses Finley and couldn't. It just so happened that there was some event at one of the schools here in Chicago, and Norman Finkelstein spoke. And afterward, I sent him an email and asked if he knew anything. I asked if he was related to Moses Finley. He said no. Their names were spelled slightly different, I believe, but he turned me on to this book, and as I say, back in the old days, getting information was hard. Now you can look these things up and get a lot more. So I did not neglect, because Finley held him in such high esteem, to get some things by Momigliano. So I've read all of this stuff. I think this one, the Essays in Modern Historiography, might be my favorite. I don't recall. And I enjoyed this one. But that said, he is not the prose stylist that Finley was by any means. Yeah, I think this was my favorite one. So now we're getting further afield, and I'll just bring into this some of the things I showed yesterday about slavery. Well, I didn't show this. The Roman Empire by Peter Garnsey and Richard Saller. Saller did that compilation book that I showed, the hardback, Economy and Society in Ancient Greece. And I read this when I was young, and it was a hard read and didn't make a lot of impression on me, though I retained parts of it, so that's a plus. At one point, I purged this book and regretted having gotten rid of it, and then saw almost the exact same thing in a used bookstore again, and so I picked it up, but I haven't revisited it, but it's probably worth doing. So Garnsey will come up again. Now here's Slavery in Classical Antiquity, some essays about that topic, edited by Finley. In that book, Aspects of Antiquity, he does a review of this book, Maurice Gauguel, and so I picked this up at some point and have not read it, but he speaks highly of it. But it's not, the Finley essay is without parallel, and I recommend it, but I'm not sure how much I need to read this at this point. If I do improve my reading to that point, then maybe I will give it a shot. But right now I'm reading things about Native Americans, a subject which has been vastly neglected in it was ignored in my upbringing, and just as an adult, it's been my one regret that I've come to the topic so late. And so I have to play catch up there. And then, reading more stuff about Christianity is probably not high on my priority list at this time. And I've mentioned K.R. Bradley or Keith Bradley. He is in one of those compilations edited by Finley, and he's just a great writer about slavery in Rome. I think he has one book that deals with something other than slavery, and I haven't managed to get through that book, but I've read all of his works on slavery and liked them. Okay, and those I showed already. And here's Ideas of Slavery. So that's Peter Garnsey again. I haven't gotten this, but when I heard that it existed, I had to pick it up because, he's responding to ideas in Finley. Finley, in fact, has a good essay about exactly that topic. I don't know that this is a compilation, though. Yeah, it's actually written by Garnsey, but I'm sure mention is made of Finley. Yeah. So he's hopefully running with Finley's methodology. Studies in Ancient Society, edited by Finley, and let's see, Aristotle and Economic Analysis. Now, I didn't even realize I had that. That's by Finley, that essay, and it's a great essay. I came across it online somewhere, and I'm glad to note that it's in this book. So that means I probably have in book form his most important stuff. So there's an essay by him on Athenian demagogues, and then that one, and then other writers. So Legal Privilege in the Roman Empire by Garnsey, something by P.A. Brunt, The Roman Mob. So I haven't looked at this, obviously, but I really ought to. Why were the early Christians persecuted? By G.E.M. de Saint Croix. I don't know how you say that name. Why were the early Christians persecuted? I really should put this on my list at this point. And then Classical Slavery, edited by Finley. I showed that one yesterday. I showed this one yesterday because the idea slave society has caused some controversy, and there's been debate about it. It's a term Finley used. I don't know if it was just a throwaway line for him or if it, reflected, well, I'm sure it reflected some deep thinking on his part, but it's an idea that continues to live and people continue to talk about. So we're coming really close to the end now. This is a book by Jeffrey Lloyd and Nathan Sivan talking about China and Greece. There's got to be in this engrossing book, two world-renowned scholars compare and contrast the cosmology, science, and medicine of China and Greece between 400 BC and AD 200. I happened to meet Nathan Sivan when he was in Chicago speaking one time, and he was a very affable man. And I've read this, though, but his writing never stuck with me, sad to say. And then G.E.R. Lloyd turns out to have he must have been very young when he did those couple of books for Finley, and he has a whole bunch of books, not all of which are within reach price-wise, but I've gotten a few of them, and I've read one of these, and it's interesting, but sort of abstruse. Investigations into ancient Greek and Chinese science. This is such an awful color. Wisdom and Morality in Ancient Greece, China, and Today. And then the Ambitions of Curiosity, Understanding the World in Ancient Greece and China. And I think this is the one that I've read, but it's been very hard reading. And it's my misfortune to retain very little of what I read. And so when something is like that, it's even harder. And then the last book, which I've never seen any confirmation or anything about it, but I read something somewhere which suggested that this book may have been translated by M.I. Finley. There's no credit anywhere, and I don't know what was the basis of that suspicion. It certainly looks like the kind of thing that might have held some interest for Finley, and maybe one day I will get to this as well. So this doesn't do much as far as telling you what the content of these books is, but I thought I would share that just to give you an idea of what kind of books exist by Finley and probably can be picked up online without too great of an expense. So I will leave that there, and thank you if you held on this long. Thank you for stopping by my channel.